Welcome to Building UIL Champions Podcast, brought to you by Pocket Coach Academy. I'm your host, Cody Morris. In this podcast, we look to help coaches, coordinators, and administrators build UIL championship programs.
What's going on, everybody? It's Cody Morris, owner, CEO, founder of Pocket Coach Academy, and today I've got a special guest. Mikyela Tedder is here with us. She is our director of UIL Journalism Resources. And if you've been around UIL for any period of time, you probably know her by name. She comes with quite the resume, having done, let me make sure I get this right, Mikyela, 27 years teaching and coaching UIL journalism, all in Texas, right? Obviously
Correct.
UIL, but you had 9 team state championships.
Correct.
And then at least 10. She had so many she couldn't remember the exact number, but at least 10 best or tops of Texas, best of Texas in journalism events. So, and that's we're just going to cut the resume off there because we've got to keep the episode short enough so that people listen. We could go on for about 30 minutes on all the accomplishments that Mikyela's had just in journalism, not to mention, in her personal life and professional career now that she's a retired teacher. But if you haven't noticed, she hasn't left the game yet. So she's here today to talk all things journalism and kind of answer some of the big burning questions that she sees on the day-to-day. So welcome to the podcast, Mikyela.
Thanks, Cody. Thanks for having me on. I do want to point out that those were my students who earned those awards, and I'm really proud of them and blessed to have been their coach.
Yes, absolutely. The correct answer. We know that it takes amazing students, and you have to, best part of the job is going out and recruiting the best students you can to make your job as easy as possible. But you don't end up there by accident. So today you can share what you learned from those students. So, I've got a couple questions for you and we're just going to jump right into it. Mikyela, for a student just starting out in UIL journalism, what is 1 or 2 competitions that you would recommend that they focus on first to help them build a strong foundation?
Sure, Cody. Well, I do want to say something you had mentioned earlier about recruiting, and I do think that that's important, right? You want to make sure that you're working with students who have a genuine interest in the journalism competitions. And if your school is lucky enough to have a Journalism 1 class, that's a good place to look for students who are showing promise with their writing. If you don't have that at your school, you can always talk to English teachers or basically any teacher in the school and find out if they've got some students who are showing a lot of promise with their writing skills as well. But as far as starting out, I think that you should start with the basics. And in journalism, the most basic competition is going to be news writing. And that's where you're going to teach students the basics of journalism writing. No matter what competition they do, a news writing contest is going to be the best place to start with a student who doesn't have any background. So if you think about like our PCA, the PCA materials, our videos, we have the beginning category, and then we have our advanced students. So we're going to start out on the very basic levels with that beginning news writing, and we're going to start by learning the basic journalism formula. And there is a very basic formula that we use in writing any journalistic story. And I don't know if I want to get into the details right now on this, but because I want people to look at our our videos and our lessons that we have for them. But that's important that you start with the basics. If you get a student who's a good writer overall, they may do really well in something like ready writing where they can sit down and where they don't have a set formula. But to succeed in any journalism competition, it's important to know the formula that the judges are going to judge them by. And that's what we want our students to know. So I would recommend starting with news writing. And then after they nail news writing.
Follow up on that. What is it about news writing that makes that the starting point? What does news writing offer beginning students that maybe, headline or feature may not be the best place?
Well, headline is a very specific competition just for that one aspect of journalism. But if you can start with news writing, you're teaching them the basic formula that you're going to use in news and in feature. You're going to tweak it just a little bit for feature.
Oh,
So
okay.
they could sit down and write a journalism story for any newspaper or any magazine across the United States, and it would follow the right formula. So they could use that in a career in journalism.
Oh, okay, that
Um,
makes sense.
yeah.
I'm ignorant to the world of journalism, but coming from speech and debate and extemp, like I understand that there's a formula and you follow the formula and you check the boxes and you do that first, and then you worry about the style points after you've, mastered the checking the boxes method. So that makes sense to me.
And I don't think I could have said it much better. You've got to get the basic formula before you worry about the style points, as you would say. We don't may not have necessarily what we call style points per se, but we do when we're grading, when we're judging a journalism story, we're looking for some style as well. So yeah, you're right. But just like in speech and debate, you can't start with the style. You've got to start with the formula.
Right.
So, same thing. Again, I would go back to that. I would recommend starting with news writing. And then if we're going to move on and they really enjoy the writing, I would go straight into feature writing. And that would be the first two competitions that I would start a beginning student with.
Absolutely. So there's your answer. If you got a new student, if you're a new coach and you want to kind of figure out how to sequence, a baby freshman that's just being, learning to walk in the world of journalism, news writing is the place because it offers the best foundational information, right? That's the way I get
Yes,
it'll
that's
be the
good.
best place that will get them the basics that then can then branch out and transfer into the other events. Whereas if you started in headline or started in feature, you're going to have to kind of backtrack when you get to news and learn more foundational things. And and it just wouldn't quite make as much sense sequentially. Is that pretty much?
That's right. I mean, you could start out with headline, but you would really just kind of, like you said, backtrack. You would be backtracking to go back to news. There are some students who don't necessarily prefer that style of writing. They don't want to write a complete story. So they may just focus on headline. But if you've got a student who's interested in writing any of the stories, then you need to start with news writing.
That makes sense to me. So, moving on top of that, given your expertise in journalism, what do you see as the most common mistake or, I should say misconception that students have about journalism competitions, and how would you go about clarifying or helping students, overcome those misconceptions?
Well, I think it ties in really well with the first question because a lot of times students may have been told that they're a really good writer in English class. And so they think that they can come in and just write this great story. But it goes back to that formula. If they're not following the formula, then that's a misconception that they have. If they think they can just sit down and free write a story. Any student who's competed in journalism knows that when you get a prompt, it is supposed to be basically an interview that has taken place with someone, which would be the journalist, and that would be their notes. So you're taking that prompt, which is the journalist's notes, and you are transcribing or making that into a story. So you have to know the formula and you have to know not only the formula, but you have to kind of know the order of people that you're going to present them in the story because there is an order that makes sense. And that's one of the things that I see with beginning journalism students is that they sit down and they'll write a story, but it just doesn't flow very well. It doesn't make as much sense to the reader. It's not as engaging because they did not write it in the correct order. And it's important that you put the most important information at the top of your story and you work your way down. And that's called the inverted pyramid formula. And we use that in news writing and it works. But if students don't know that and they just start writing and they're not using that formula, then their story is not going to sound as good as someone who has experience, who's written a story that does make sense and it flows and it goes from most important to least important.
Yeah, I mean that sounds clear as day to me, and I've never coached journalism before. But so like you know, on that thought, you were in the state journalism grading room all day, right? You graded for all five competitions. Am I wrong?
Correct.
So tell us, having graded all those papers and entries at the highest level, was there one common mistake that you see or saw students making, or was there something that was really kind of the theme of what was separating the medalist from the non-medalist?
Well, yes, for sure. I mean, obviously, the errors are going to depend on the contest. Something that maybe we saw more of in news, we may have saw something else in the feature contest. But a lot of it did come back to the students who had the stories that followed the format correctly. Because believe it or not, we did have a few students in each competition who didn't have necessarily what I would call the best format. It would kind of work, but the order of the story wasn't correct, didn't flow as well as it should.
Hmm.
And that comes from practice. That comes from um, getting those prompts, whether they're PCA prompts, UIL prompts, and writing those stories and getting people to critique your story. And that's one of the things, that people can get from PCA, is that we have the ability for students to enter virtual competitions
Yeah.
where we give them feedback on their stories. And any teacher will tell you that that feedback is very important for students to get. That's how they grow. Um, Another
Yeah. I mean,
misconception. Yeah, go ahead. No, go
oh, I
ahead.
was gonna say like that holds true across, I think, any activity is just you got to have the reps, because there's just a large variance of what could be in the prompt and what that prompt or that topic or that, I think about debate, that round is going to ask of your students. And if you haven't encountered those type of, complexities or different events and discussed it, through the repetitions of just doing rounds or, writing prompts or like going through prompts, even if they're old prompts or, like in our example, doing the virtual tournaments, which are really great and beneficial. But,
They
you know,
are.
but
Yeah.
the reality is just getting reps for your students comes to be a very crucial part of success at the highest level because whichever student is best prepared for the challenges that prompt present is probably going to have the upper hand in terms of, placing and doing well that day.
Absolutely. I mean, I think just like we talk about speech contests, journalism and speech are subjective contests,
Right.
right? So we're not looking for 2 + 2 = 4. It's what the judge feels like is the best, right? And so the more reps you have, as you put it, the more practice you have, the more scenarios you've written a story about, makes you more prepared for what you're going to see at stake. And I feel like that was part of what the problem was in the judging room you'd asked about was we had some fairly difficult prompts, which I think works well. I mean, you're working your way to state. You should have a more difficult prompt,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Um, but you have to be ready for that, and you have to have written something that prepared you for that, and gotten some feedback so that you're kind of prepared for any scenario with that prompt. So yeah, get the
So
reps in, get the practice, get the feedback.
I
And
know
then
that I know that you're going to be biased, but would you say that the prompts that you and Rory write for the virtual tournaments that you try and make those pretty difficult
we try
and
to, okay, so one of the
challenging?
things that we talked about this year is, at the beginning of the season, we're going to have students compete who have all levels of competition, but we are going to have some students who are brand new. So one of the things that we are really focusing on is as the season goes on, we ramp up the difficulty of the prompt. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, that makes
So I'm
makes
not
sense
going
to
to
me.
start you out with a state level, very difficult prompt in October
Yeah.
when we've got a freshman sitting in journalism one and this is their first meet. So, we want you to be prepared, but we also don't want to freak you out on, in an October tournament about something you would maybe see in April or May.
Yeah, that's a good point. In speech and debate, they'll have novice divisions where you can, your beginners, your brand new first time to compete can go in and compete against other first timers. It's a little more head to head than, writing
Sure.
journalism, but considering that, the difficulty will come from the prompt and not necessarily the opponent, that makes a lot of sense that you would want the challenge to build through the year.
We do, but also that head to head is going to come in the judging room
Right.
with a paper that you turn in versus a verbal, back and forth, maybe, debate. So, um, yeah, it I guess it's more equivalent to like your extemp competitions, right? Where
Yes.
they've
Yeah, that
all
makes
got the
sense.
same topic and the same judges, but they're not necessarily competing at the same time. But it comes down to the scores at the end of the day. Who's got the best score is going to win. And that's the
Yeah.
same way it is with journalism. We don't necessarily have a score sheet, but we do. The judges are scoring them in our heads and we're ranking them. So
Yeah.
it's the same thing.
And there's all those unwritten rules that, are not on the ballots, they're not on the materials, but they're in every judge's mind as they grade, right?
Sure, sure. And that comes down to, what story is written the best overall. Sometimes we're nitpicking things, who made the least number of errors. And, so that comes with those reps, that comes with the practice.
So let's kind of shift gears a little bit. I want you to share, we talked about, or you talked about, I gave the credit, I gave as much credit as I could to you, and then, humbly as you are, you pass it on to your students. But could you give me a fun success story, especially maybe something for like new coaches that are, working to try and find that first moment of success, or, find their way in the journalism world of UIL. Is there a success story or an aha moment from a student that you worked with that significantly improved their UIL journalism performance, using your methods or resources?
Well, I just want to say that I was a new coach at one time too, and and I do consider myself very blessed to have started my career in East Texas, where journalism coaches are in the room judging the papers, and the journalism teachers in East Texas are called the East Texas Mafia for a reason. They're very supportive of one another, but they also in that same realm, they're not scared to share their tips, their tricks, which is what we do with PCA with our videos. I'm telling you everything that I was taught. And so I've always felt like that's very important for new
Yeah,
coaches.
absolutely.
You got to get in there and judge. It's easy to sit out and say, I'm new, I don't know what I'm doing. But at some point, you have to get in that room because you're not going to learn how to coach your students until you are taught by someone who knows what they're doing. So, and no matter where you are, West Texas, South Texas, wherever, find somebody who's been successful in UIL, because that's what we're talking about, and pick their brain and ask them these questions. How did you get your start? What would you do to get your team going? Those kinds of things. Take your kids to competitions. I cannot stress that enough. And with the virtual contests that we have that are available now, I mean, it is imperative that those kids get feedback. And sometimes, if you're new, you're learning as much as the students are from their feedback. Oh, well, we need to tweak this here. I need to teach students to do this here. So make sure you have some mentors. Make sure that you are immersing yourself as the coach in as many possible scenarios where judging is going on. Volunteer to help. And even if they don't need you, sit in the room and listen to what's going on because you'll learn just as much, and you'll be surprised. They may not need you. And then all of a sudden you're asking questions and they're handing you a pen saying, here, sit here. You can start now because
Yeah.
you're starting to give them some feedback that they've been giving you. So it's just cyclical and you just pick it up. So that's very important. You cannot learn how to coach until you have been around coaches. And the ones you want to be around are the ones that have had success. and they will
Absolutely.
share what they know because it's just journalism. That's just journalism coaches are pretty open about that. As far as
Absolutely.
students, same thing for the students. The best advice I can give anybody, even if you've coached for 27 years, okay, I would be telling my students what to do in the beginning. We're going to follow this formula. We're going to do this. We're going to, yeah, all this. And then you take them to a meet and they get feedback on their paper and they're like, you told me that. Yes, I did. All of a sudden, the light bulb goes off in their head and they think you know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
They have
Miss
to
Tedder
hear it from
isn't,
somebody else.
yeah, Miss Tedder
It's
isn't
true.
incompetent. She knows what she's doing. You're like,
Yeah,
yes, I've done this for
maybe.
20 years. I
Yeah,
promise you.
just a
Yeah.
little bit. Yeah. They're high
That's the
school kids.
Yeah,
That's
that's the fun
how
thing. Every
teenagers
year you have
are.
to re-convince 14 and 15-year-olds that you're not a complete numbskull
Exactly. And
because they
sometimes it
think,
is every year. It's
yeah,
like, I taught you, you went to state last year, but all of a sudden I don't know what I'm doing this year. Okay,
right. Oh
okay.
yeah, there's that
Yeah.
sophomore Superman syndrome or whatever you want to call it, where they learn everything freshman year and then they don't need you sophomore year, and then they come back to you junior year when they realize that
In
they're
the
better
senior
they're
year,
better
they're
with you.
begging. I have to, and I think I was going to mention that as a common misconception as well. It's because it is a blessing and a curse when a student makes it to state because it's a blessing for that year. But if they're not a senior and they're coming back, there's so much pressure on them to get back. And it's hard. There's only 12 in each division that make it to
Right.
state, right? And so it's or three from each region if you just really want to break it down. It's very hard. And they put so much pressure on themselves. And sometimes they think they know everything and you can't teach them anything, and it takes a loss somewhere along the way to all of a sudden make them realize I still need to grow.
Yeah.
That's the misconception, is that even if you make it to state and win the gold medal, there's room for growth the next year. And you cannot sit back and think, any student cannot sit back and think, I got this in the bag, because that's just not the way it is in a subjective contest.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's that way in any part of life. If you're not
No,
growing, you're shrinking. If
exactly.
you're not focused on getting better each day, then you're getting worse. There is no staying the same. Maintaining requires at least a small percent of growth. You may not be getting, 10x better year over year, but if you're just trying to copy and paste, you're gonna decline, whatever it is. You've got to be focused on moving forward, um, and not just staying where you're at, or, thinking that I got here and reached the destination and now I can just sit uh, on the results that I've accomplished. So yeah, I mean, I think that's applicable to all aspects of life. All
It
right,
is.
so
Yeah.
oh, yeah,
No,
so
you're good. You're good.
last question I got, so we can keep this inside of our listeners' daily commute. We appreciate y'all. We're trying to bring value and some UIL content. There's a desert out there nobody's talking about what all of us spend our day to day and year stressing over and preparing for, and making our careers. So last one, let's talk about journalism advisors, right? They're coaches who are new. So let's finish this podcast off with a bang. Like, what's the big one piece heavy hitting advice that you can give new coaches, that if you could sit down with every new coach and tell them this one thing, what would it be?
Well, it would be what I said about, as far as find some people around you who will mentor you, who will give you advice. And if for journalism contests, if there is any way that you can get a journalism one class at your school, then you can work on UIL in class. That is what you talk about, because that's your journalism one, basic journalism, and you're teaching them these 5 contests that we have, and then you're expanding on that. I was always lucky to have a journalism one class when I was teaching journalism the entire time. And I started at the beginning of the year, like 1 week of, back to school stuff, and it was right into news writing. I mean, and then by Christmas, we had already covered news, feature, and editorial. We
Wow.
might not have gotten through editorial, but we were into it. And then right after Christmas, we were finishing it up and we were going into headline and then copy editing. And then we were doing some other stuff. If you can get a journalism one class at your school, then you can work on UIL in class for their subjects every single day. And it works hand in hand. It's great. If you aren't lucky enough to have that, then you can work with them outside of, school, before school, after school. Um, I I coached journalism my entire career, but for the last 5 years, I taught marketing classes. And so I would coach my UIL team in the mornings before school or after school because it doesn't matter whether you're at a 1A or a 6A school, you've got kids that try to do everything. So they're in athletics and they're in UIL and blah, blah, blah. And I would have to work with band practice schedules and basketball and
Right.
volleyball and whatever, football, whatever. And so sometimes I was having practice before and after school to accommodate their schedules. But what I usually did was on Mondays was news writing. If you were trying out for news writing, then you came in before or after school and I worked with you on news writing. Tuesdays were feature writing and so forth. And, as you can imagine, Wednesdays were editorial, Thursdays were headline, and then we would do copy editing on Fridays. And, you know, that was what worked for me. And if you don't have a journalism one, then you have to work with students with their schedule because we are recruiting these kids. If they're good, they're good. You know, rarely do you get a kid that's all they do is your UIL. If it's not
Right.
UI, they're trying to do speech and journalism or,
And
whatever.
and if they're
Right?
only doing your stuff, that might be a red flag. You're like, why does nobody else have you
Um,
on their teams? Like, what do they
Well,
know that
unless
I
they
don't know
just
here?
know,
Yeah.
yeah, but they're competitive, right? Those kids
Right.
that do all the stuff, they're competitive, and that's what we want. We want kids that want to win and want to work for it. So yeah, so you can make it work, but you have to find time to meet with your students, whether it's in journalism one or outside of school. You have to get them to write for you after you teach them, and if you're new or if you don't know, let's just say you're a science teacher and somebody said, okay, this year you're going to have to coach the 5 journalism events. Well, then honestly, I'm totally biased, but I think you need to buy a pocket coach and put them on their videos and let them, they can do that at home. I mean,
Yeah.
they can do our stuff at home. If you're
I mean,
working with your
that
content.
was the point in the design was to
Yeah,
solve that pain point because it's a common issue. It's a common unfortunately, the if the school loses its head basketball coach, they're going to post for a head basketball coach that can teach A, B, or C, right? If they lose
right,
their journalism coach, they're hiring a marketing teacher and then they're going to tell them that we also need you to coach journalism if you take this job. It's like, or they're going to pass it on to the person who does yearbook and or whatever, whoever they can
correct.
get to
Yeah,
not say no, right?
right.
And
That's
so,
it.
we end up with a lot of coaches that are given a lot of stress that they didn't necessarily ask for. And, that's one of our motto. I say one of that is our motto at Pocket Coach. If you go to the Facebook page, it says, every student deserves a coach and every coach deserves a mentor. And, that's everything that we do is designed to make that a reality for every school in any school in the state of Texas. And, maybe in the future we'll go nationwide, but we know UIL still needs plenty of attention and there's a lot of opportunity there to increase the participation and performance for students and coaches in UIL events. And Mikyela, I know that you're like me and you're a UIL believer, and you've seen the difference that it makes in students' lives and the impact. I mean, honestly, the impact it's probably made in our lives. From a professional standpoint, the the confidence that I got as an individual from being able to find success coaching students in UIL, it changed the way that I viewed myself. It changed the way that I carried myself. It changed the way that I looked at my future. Um, And it was really one of the first moments, that first state championship, you kind of, when you look in the mirror the next day, you don't see the same person anymore. And it's the same for the students of, when you can help them, see the potential inside of themselves through this avenue of academic competition, you can change the perspective you have, um, and that person you see in the mirror and the potential and like I've seen it in myself and I've seen it in a number of students, and I know, you've shared that with me as well in the past of, and that's why we've been here for so long, and why we're so passionate about building out these resources and providing these opportunities. So yeah. So if you didn't catch that, biggest piece of information, best advice is be in the room where it happens, right? Like
Yeah,
steal
be in
that
the
from
judging
Hamilton there,
room.
but
Yeah.
be in the judging room.
Yeah, be in the
Go
judging room.
bother
Don't be
people.
scared to go in there and tell and straight up say, I'm new to this, but I want to learn. And they will help you learn. They will. Just
Even if
remember,
you don't tell them you want to learn, they're going to come. If you're in the room, they're going to try and teach you how to judge some papers. Every time I
they
walk in
will.
that room, they're, "Are you here to judge?
Yeah,
Okay, come here."
yeah. No matter what.
I'm like,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
can't read.
exactly.
I don't. I'm sorry. Like,
Yeah, no, you're right. They
yeah,
will, and it's just like our students. They start somewhere. Even the state champion started as a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, whatever. But they had a starting level, and they had to work up to that. And
right,
coaches have to do the same thing. You can't start
absolutely.
out coaching a state champion team your first year. You don't know what you're doing. You have to learn just like they do. So, yeah, it's important.
All right. Well, Mikyela, I really appreciate you taking some time out of your evening here to come speak with us and talk journalism. We're gonna have you on throughout the year, and we'll have some more specific, and we'll get into some more nitty gritty, detailed stuff to really bring some value. You talked about the formula a lot. Maybe one episode we can dive deep into the formula and what that looks like. I look forward to having you on again, and thank you to everyone who tuned into the podcast and is enjoying or finding value. If you need any help with your journalism team, with your UIL team this year, we've literally created a business and a resource designed to take a lot of stress off coaches' plates, to provide opportunities for students who maybe don't have a dedicated journalism coach. Maybe they just have an English teacher with a big heart who doesn't want to see these kids miss the opportunity. And so, whatever the situation is, we've designed our resources. Mikyela has built out these courses, materials, so that they're available and ready to use no matter where you are in your journey, no matter what your future intentions are. Been there for 20 years, it can be a tool for you. If you've been there for 20 minutes, it can be a foundation for you to build your year and your program off of. So we highly recommend you check it out. If you have more information, you can go to pocketcoachacademy.com and book a call with me, and we can break it all down and show you how we support UIL teams and programs across nearly every competition. So until then, check us out next week. This was episode 6 of the Building UIL Championships podcast.